I want to tell you about our book of the month this month. It is called Black and Reformed by Anthony Carter. This is a book that, let me deal with the Reformed part first. This is a book that talks about Reformed theology, and Pastor Carter defines it, the idea that God is sovereign over all things in life, individual salvation in terms of predestination and election, as well as the course of history and all details of our existence. I think he makes a strong biblical case for that. And so if you're interested in learning more about that Reformed theology and how God's sovereignty intersects with everyday life, this would be a book that I recommend to you. The black part of it, well, he points out this: when you talk to somebody about Reformed theology, one of the pushbacks you often get is, well, what about so-and-so who died, who was a good person, who never heard about Jesus? Are you saying, God wanted that person to go to hell or predestined that person to go to hell? Except if you're African American, he says. And then the most common pushback you'll get on this is, what about slavery? Are you saying that God is sovereign over a nation that had the slave trade, that was incredibly sinful, that enslaved a whole segment of its population? In fact, when many of the slave owners were professing Christians themselves, how can you declare the sovereignty of God? Is God sovereign over that? And so he takes the idea of Reformed theology and deals with that question and talks about the difficulty of being black and Reformed. In doing so, I'm not going to preach the whole book to you this morning, although I'm tempted to. In doing so, he gives three arguments for Reformed theology. First of all, it's biblical, and I think he makes a compelling point for that. Secondly, that it's experiential. This is his third point, but I'll change the order. It's experiential. In other words, Reformed theology teaches that God needs to save you, and that changes your life. That when you've had an encounter with the gospel, you're a changed individual. And that kind of experiential theology, very different than just the mental assent kind of Christianity that is common in a lot of predominantly white churches, like I checked a box, so I'm in. And the African American culture, it tends to be more experiential, and how Reformed theology should fit very nicely in that, because that's what it teaches, that God has to actually change your life for you to be a Christian. But the other point that I had never thought about seriously before was what he calls the historical argument, that our country seems to have done everything in its possible to keep African Americans from hearing the gospel. The fact that today you have a strong, growing segment of African American Christians in our country is in itself testimony to the sovereignty of God. I mean, how else would you explain the fact that the gospel still is a warm reception in much of the black community, if not for the sovereignty of God? I mean, there is no other explanation except that God is, as Pastor Carter describes, literally bringing his church up from the chains, which fits again very well with Reformed theology. So I commend this book to you. It's for sale in our bookstore I think for the rest of this month, but today it's at a special price. It will even beat Amazon if you go to our bookstore.